Hello everyone, Kia ora from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Magandang umaga po. Today I'd like to share a short story about my story with open data and mapping. And I'd like to think of this um, less of a lecture, but more of a long-term conversation about why I do what I do and the role that open data communities and even open source communities play in that. It's a conversation about cartography in the face of crises. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you my experience in terms of work and in terms of life in general, and in particular, what I'm doing now for the PhD. At present, I'm a student here in New Zealand, uh, temporarily in exile. I suppose it's not safe to be in the Philippines now, and for a good reason. I'm hosted by the Geospatial Research Institute. It's a new institute in New Zealand uh, that functions as a center of research about GIS and mapping and related topics as this country builds its capacity. Right. So here we go. I'm David, and I make maps. Not the best maps, but those that are just good enough so we can share them. For example, every now and then I produce maps about the Philippines. This one I used open source software like QGIS, Quantum GIS, and modeling software such as Blender. And I always use open raster datasets such as those by NASA, their digital elevation models, and also vector files from OpenStreetMap. So the shapes that you see here, the shapes of the islands were from the OpenStreetMap dataset, and even the other thematic maps that I used are partially or wholly from open source. And I used to make this to present these slides to LGUs to local government unit officers when we are discussing about their urban plans and their aspirations for their city. And my main message is that in the Philippines there are no places that are completely safe. There are only places of varying risks. And because of open data, it's easier to convey that message because I save time instead of processing things from scratch. I have something ready to share immediately to Filipinos, especially Filipino leaders. Sometimes I'm also involved in mapping difficult stories such as this, which is a map of where people were killed in Quezon City in the calamitous and disastrous drug war of the current government. Here I used open source data in terms of the administrative boundaries in the barangays of Quezon City. More about this later, maybe someday in another lecture. Right. I like I like open data again because it saves time and it helps me express patterns about the country, like here, cities, towns, and villages of the Philippines. And recently, I've started making maps of other countries too, just to expand my skills again. Um, I use open data for these works like this one in Japan, a relief map of Japan, and New Zealand, where I'm currently at. Uh, and I share them for free because it promotes geography. So in this sense, geography is being promoted through open data. And the funny thing is, I used to just work on Philippine data like this one. This is where the inspiration for this map that I made started. 100 largest islands of the Philippines, and then later you find out that the National Mapping Agency of Britain is copying your work, which is kind of nice. So if you're interested, I'm on social media, maybe too much, and can look for Mapmaker David in LinkedIn and Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and Patreon. Please support me if you want. So that's the first part. I make maps, and I also make maps so I can live. It's a job. It's work. And because of open data, I was able to work in the academe and the UN. I was able to go through grad school in London, in UCL, where I found out was where OpenStreetMap started, in the same school. I didn't know. I did a master in geospatial analysis in the Department of Geography, which was the place where the first PhD dissertation in GIS was submitted by Roger Tomlinson, I think, in the 60s or 70s, because he was through a consultancy, he was constructing a, a computerized cartography system for Canada for natural resources, and he submitted in the department. Also, with open data, I was able to work for the cities program of the London School of Economics in a project called the Urban Age, where we mapped patterns across major urban areas across the world. At the same time, I was part of the Missing Maps project as a local volunteer, just helping the newcomers be involved in volunteer mapping for places that are hit by disease or war or conflict or crisis, such as places where Ebola is happening. So what happens in Missing Maps, which I will explain later, is that people contribute their time by learning how to make maps remotely, and those maps, those data sets are important for field workers. When I got back to the Philippines from the UK, I went back to humanitarian work briefly to work in Marawi, and that was also the time when OpenStreetMap helped me and my team and the people of Marawi as we were talking about the future of the city. More stories later. And now I'm in New Zealand doing a PhD about that experience and more. Uh, so I make maps so I can live. When I was an urban planner with geohazard maps and open data, we made maps for Ireland. When my portfolio got larger, I was given the task of helping local government units with the design team and the local community to help them ideate concepts for sustainable urban development. This is one for Iloilo, uh, for their proposed city extension. Eventually, with open data, I was able to contribute to national reports on urban development, such as this one, with the Inhabited again, and ACID, the Spanish aid agency, and HUDSI, which is now the Ministry for Housing and Urban Development. This road network data, this map is from OpenStreetMap road network data, and again, it really helps in raising the awareness of people about spatial patterns and getting them to think more critically about uh, the urban as a system. In that report, we also created several guidelines, again inspired by open data. This is the book that I was a part of in terms of making when I was in London. And please buy it if you have the time. But I guess it really started when this long journey, long struggle of making maps so I can live really started back home, because we had a very difficult life, and I was looking for a way on uh, for a way to contribute to my country, and making maps made sense, and open data made me do that, helped me do that. Which and in that struggle, in that journey, I was involved in volunteer and in humanitarian operations in Haiyan. And after the Marawi siege, this one on the left is a photo of another person that happened after the typhoon. And this is a photo of that I took when I was inside the battle zone with JRD zone when we were doing field work. Again, just to refresh, Typhoon Haiyan was the strongest typhoon in history to make landfall, and the Battle of Marawi was the first major conflict ISIS loyalists in Southeast Asia. So, which brings us to my final subreddit, final story. I make maps that are good enough. I make maps so I can live, and I make maps so I can give. My my observation is this. Throughout the years, I've observed that crowdsourced geographic information, such as OpenStreetMap, which is a type of open data, can be helpful in humanitarian action and community development, or broadly in participatory mapping, because in the past, mapping was usually done by national agencies, by military agencies. But over the past, say, decade or two, we've seen an increase in the involvement of citizens and non-professional mappers and enthusiasts and people who are not paid to do it, but they contribute to projects like OpenStreetMap. And it proves very useful, especially in our experiences in Marawi and Hayan and more. So, for example, in Tacloban, this is how OpenStreetMap looks. What happened back then? Flashback to everyone who was there. I was still teaching in the UP Department of Geography, and one day I was told that the storm that the typhoon was coming, and there was a group called OpenStreetMap, and we needed to collaborate and to work together. So Maning and others, Jules was also there, Jules Mangate. Um, they were there to we were tracing buildings and other features days before for the landfall with the group called the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. And then Haiyan happened with a large death toll. This is the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, uh, which is one of the best, lovely success stories I've seen in this planet. And imagine for months people were tracing places that were hit by the typhoon just because it was the right thing to do. And this is the effect before and after of the base maps. I worked in my part of the story is in Giwan in particular, which was the first town hit by the typhoon. It's an interesting place, low-lying area, very exposed to the elements, but very resilient. The interesting part is that it's the first landing of Ferdinand Magellan when he was circling around the globe. The first encounter in the Battle of Leyte Gulf was also there, where the Americans returned to kick the Japanese out. And the first landfall of Super Typhoon Haiyan. So people there are very interesting. They're always the first in terms of colonization, crisis, and climate change. This is the effect, the environmental effect, which is uh, staggering. Uh, this was where the soil was, and that topsoil was removed by the storm surge because of a there were houses there on top. This wood was the product of the typhoon. This type of cross, that wood wasn't there, according to the residents before the typhoon. And because of OpenStreetMap, we found out that there are a lot of places that need help, like Victoria Island. Uh, you see Maning editing there, Maning the legend. Uh, but and the irony is in the maps of the national government. I'm not gonna name the agency, which are supposed to be authoritative. The place is just a coral. So imagine you're a resident there, you're voting, you're a citizen of the Republic of the Philippines, and you vote, and you're survivors of a typhoon, and you find out that you don't even exist as a village. Anyway, with the data of OpenStreetMap and other open data sets, the team that I was part in, Nico, Murabi, Jukuchoke, Jaluano, Miles Vela, and others, made maps with the residents. And we went around. This is their famous photo when we were doing fieldwork. It has appeared so many times. And thank you very much, team. I love you. That's our hero, Miko, explaining the maps, making the maps with with the people of Tacloban. And I guess one of my reflections is that even if OpenStreetMap and other formats of open data are not not really good in terms of quality with respect to international professional standards, and there is uncertainty because it's made by different people with different experiences, levels of training, different types of different qualities of imagery. It's usable in that case because the national government data sets were missing or inaccessible or just so hard to get. OpenStreetMap was there, so it was not the perfect data in the world, but it was good enough to use. And when you're mapping in the middle of adversity and in difficult conditions, at least we had something. The good thing with that view, when you shift your view from quality to uncertainty to usability, is that your way of mapping also changes. So, for example, in GIS in our tradition, this is the most popular one, which is the representational one. When you look at a piece of data, spatial data, you look at the quality, uncertainty, accuracy. The view is mapping is a way of knowing, and mapping should more or less reflect what the so-called real world is. And then after that, there's another view called kind of a pragmatic view. You see the usability, you see the value, the relevance, and you try to measure that. It's because mapping is thought of as some sort of a consumption exercise, or as a way even to claim or to control the territory. But then if you look at the ethical view, open data really makes sense because even if the accuracy is not as good as the professionally made ones or not really as valuable as the usual ones, but just because it was made not just for but by the people, it helps address these aspects of the information. So right now my question is this in the PhD, and I guess it's just another part of my long struggle in terms of making meaning and making maps is this. At what point and under which conditions does crowdsourced geographic information, open data like OpenStreetMap, become useful in community mapping, in participatory mapping, and for whom? I still don't know all the answers, but so far I've been trying to sketch and reflect, and I will do an ethnography about this. I will return to the Philippines someday and do case studies and address these aspects that I talked about. Hopefully with the local community, so I hope we can work together. And so far, um, these are the points that I'd like to work on in terms of open data, OpenStreetMap, crowdsourcing, and participatory mapping. There's a difference in making a map available and a difference in making a map accessible. It is different, or it takes more work to make the map not only available and accessible but acceptable. And moving forward from that, moving further, even if the map is available, accessible, or even acceptable, if the people are not involved, especially the local people, the impact of the mapping will not be that the outcomes will be limited. Because the moment the mapping team leaves and still the environment changes, who's going to make the maps now? And people, we move on, we get married, we find jobs, we can't volunteer all the time. And this part is really the tough one to crack. Takes a long time to build, to help people make the map by themselves. Anyway, so here I am trying to make more maps and while figuring that out. Um, and I'm thinking of a series of case studies, including the Philippines and New Zealand, and maybe some here in Oceania. I made this map, by the way. It's free, using the same methods as the one I showed earlier. And to contribute to projects like Missing Maps, which is a joint project by the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team with organizations like the British Red Cross, American Red Cross, MSF, Doctors Without Borders, plus, to make this a reality. These principles that we should link crowdsourcing, collaborative mapping, and community mapping, even radical approaches such as counter mapping and citizen science, just so mapping can make a difference. And broadly, this is what Missing Maps does. We link different levels, different sectors in terms of making maps. It's a very social way of mapping. I still think that it can make a difference because a year after Haiyan, let's go back to that story. When there was another super typhoon that hit the region, and because a lot of us local map makers made the maps not just for but with the local community, it was easier for the residents to understand the data, and it was easier for us, the so-called experts, to make better maps that are understandable. And it was easier to convince people to move. Uh, and together with many other humanitarian initiatives and local initiatives, there were zero casualties in Diwan. There's really a difference when we start with open data because it opens other practices like this one in Marawi. And you know, in the Philippines, where the practice is when there's a planning session, it's just a lecture, people sit back, a so-called consultation with a powerful person like the mayor or the planner presenting the maps on the slides, and then people just say yes or no or give suggestions. But when the data is open to its most raw level, it sets off a series of practices that makes moments like this possible. Where people come together and lay down their values, lay down their stories, and talk and decide and hopefully act. It, it, it shifts the power relationships, and that for me is very precious. So there. One of my reflections is maybe it's not really the data itself, but the relationships that produce the data that make a bigger difference. Maybe mapping cannot directly change the world, but it can help those who will. So there you go. I'm David. I make maps. I make maps so I can live, and I make maps so I can give. Thank you very much, and please have a mappy day.